Please could we be given warning at the beginning of a programme if there's going to be anything about the Beatles, as all Beatle fans can make sure to listen, and have a chance to ring up other fans to make sure they are also listening.
Hi everybody, this is John here. This is Paul, George,
and Ringo.
And we're very happy to be on your program once again.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Beatles News Briefs number 107, hosted by veteran Beatles reporter Steve Marinucci. This is the first of two special shows discussing the highly anticipated film Borrowed Time, which will debut in the U.S. with a screening in New York on December 8th, followed by more screenings and release on streaming sites and home video. In today's episode, we chat extensively with Alan G. Parker, the film's director and writer, who takes us behind the scenes on how the project came together. One of its highlights, the film reveals a fascinating scoop about John Lennon's planned tour to support the iconic Double Fantasy album. Of course, we'll also bring you some quick updates in our Beatles news briefs and share our thoughts on the new Beatles Anthology Collection. So sit back, relax, and let's get into it.
Hello and welcome to another Beatles News Brief podcast. I'm your host, Steve Marinucci. As you heard in the introduction, we have an interview with Alan G. Parker, the writer and director of the documentary Borrowed Time, Lennon's Last Decade, about the making of the film, and additionally, he previews some of the details that are revealed for the first time in the film of the spectacular tour that John and Yoko had planned to support Double Fantasy. We also have some Beatle news and comments on the anthology, so let's get to it. I am here with Alan G. Parker, the writer and director of the John Lennon documentary Borrowed Time. Alan, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to talk to me for Beatles News Briefs.
Thank you for having me. I think you'd have to describe it as a labour of love because we've never done a film in our lives that took between 5 and 6 years before. But we did take that long on this one through a lot of reasons that were completely out of our control, you know, COVID, Brexit, got in the path of this film. It's almost like there was someone up there in the sky. The gods didn't want the film to get made, but we persevered and made it anyway. So it's kind of not bad.
And that was actually my first question. How long did it take you to make it? When did you start thinking about it?
We did a Sgt. Pepper documentary film.
Right.
In the summer of 2017 here in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we did a staggered opening. So I think we released in America in November or December of 2017. And then we did countries like Japan and Australia in February, March 2018, right? Mm-hmm. It was 50 years ago today because I couldn't think of a more obvious title. Although it wasn't official, it had a great deal of Beatles footage in because we'd done some good deals with some of the big like clip houses over here and around the world, and they had some great footage. And it was kind of telling the backstory of the whole. It wasn't about the tracks because we knew we didn't have access to the tracks. So It was Jesus Christ Remark, John meets Yoko, Psychedelia, LSD, Brian dies, Maharishi, and on it goes, right? Those kind of things. It covered a 16-month period between about the back end of 1966 and the early days of 1968, right?
Okay.
And it was a massive success. I mean, there's no describing how big it was. Everybody was flabbergasted by it. We knew it would be successful, but we didn't know it would be that successful. It kind of blew up big time.
Okay.
It did when the whole PR campaign and everything ended, which would have been around March, April 2018, so almost a calendar year later. Our business manager at the time sat down with me and said, well, what next? Because we'd never done an unofficial film before. We'd always done official films, where, you know, Monty Python, Status Quo, Clash, Sex Pistols, whatever it might be. They were all official movies, right?
Okay.
And we were sat chatting about a few things. We'd been in contact with two very big bands who we were talking to a lot at the time. So we were potentially looking at doing another big official movie. And our business manager said something very interesting. He said to me, look, we've just had this massive amount of success based on the 50th anniversary of possibly the biggest selling album of all time, Sgt. Pepper. Has it never crossed your mind that the assassination of John Lennon, the 40th anniversary, is less than a year and a half away, December 2020? And I thought about it. I thought, wow. And the minute he said it, the minute it planted a seed, because mum and dad, it's hard to believe now looking at this fella in front of you, but I'd been quite a slight child, a small child. And I was like a pipe cleaner till I was about 13 or 14 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm born with a thing called malacephalia. Means big head, you have a lump on the back. So I was bullied to death. I mean, literally from about the ages of about 7 or 8 till about 13 or 14, I was absolutely bullied to death.
Mm-hmm.
It's during that time period, because me and my brother were glam rock fans. My dad was a music fan, so we'd always had records bought for us and, you know, singles and albums and stuff. But we were very much into Slade, Sweet, Mud, Glitter Band, Rubette, you know, that Bay City Rollers.
Yep.
Member for the Rollers, aged 9. Then suddenly along had come this band from Liverpool who no longer actually existed, but I was presented with a cassette tape by a kid I knew who was a bit older than me. And on side 1 was the Rubber Soul album, and on side 2 was the Revolver album. And I listened to this tape. As I said, I was being very badly bullied at the time, so I was indoors a lot. Right? And I remember coming downstairs at mum and dad's, and I was crying. And my mum went, "Oh, darling, what's wrong?" I said, "You know this tape the guy gave me?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "There's a song on it about me." She said, "Oh, I doubt, you know, this band split up like whatever it was 5 years ago. I doubt there's a song on about you." I said, "There's a song on it about me. It's been written about me." She said, "Well, would you play it for me?" So I played it for her, and it was Nowhere Man. And she cried, and she said, "Darling, it's not about you, but I understand why, you know, with the words, I know why you might think it's about you." Because I spent most of the time indoors reading comics, right? Couldn't go out. The kids who bullied me lived in our area. So that led to that Christmas. Dad always used to say to me and my brother, "Would you like any albums for Christmas, boys?" And I said, because it's about all I knew at that point in time, "Can I have the one with all the people on the cover?" Of course, I meant Pepper. Lo and behold, on Christmas Day, Sergeant Pepper turned up. We lived in Blackburn, Lancashire. So I start playing this album by this band who I'm already convinced in my little 9-year-old mind have written one song about me already called Nowhere Man. I get to the last track of the album on Christmas Day, and Lennon sings, "I read the news today, oh boy, 4,000 dolls in Blackburn, Lancashire." And I go running through the other room and go, "Dad, they're still talking about us. It's where we live." I was utterly convinced this guy Lennon, who I'd never met, I was 9 years old, was trying to get a message to me, right? So mum and dad had kind of brought John and the Beatles into my life. So fast forward to the summer of 2018, when all the press on the Pepper movie is done, and we're having a talk about what next. And when the possibility was put on the table that, you know, we're only 2 years away from the 40th anniversary of John's passing, that's another big anniversary. Wouldn't that be a good idea to do a film about, let's say, the last 10 years of John's life? I said yes for one simple reason. I wanted to dedicate a film to mum and dad. I'd made 14 movies, and I thought, if the next one I make, I want it to be a film for mum and dad. That neither of them are with us anymore. They're both gone. And I want to have a movie where when it ends and the credit roll goes up, it says, "This film is dedicated to Harry Parker and Olive Parker." Dead simple. Mm-hmm. So I signed up. I basically said, "Okay, here's a plan. Why don't we spend the rest of 2018 into 2019 doing enough research as a team to find out if there even is a John Lennon film that needs making, right? What's the angle going to be on it? There's been a lot of John Lennon films. What's the angle going to be that's new?" Initially, the plan had been that we were going to do a film regarding the various conspiracy theories, believe it or not, as to whether or not the killer, who I'll never name anywhere, had been trained by the FBI, the CIA, or whoever, right? Because there were all these books being written about, whether or not he'd been a patsy or whatever it might be.
Right.
I could kind of prove in a movie that categorically he wasn't a patsy. I feel like I would have done something for John, whereas he did a lot for me without ever knowing it as a kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we went down that rabbit hole, and I have to say, any of the team would tell you, we spent a long time going down that rabbit hole, Steve. We 10 months going down that rabbit hole. I read this book, Let Me Take You Down. I read the book by the lawyer. I spoke to a couple of people in America. I spoke to someone at NYPD. I also tracked down a couple of ex-Dakota building doormen, spoke to them. So we were building. Then I suddenly hear this would be late 2019, by which point we've already been out looking for investment money as well, for someone to put the money up to make this film, right? Because the plan was start shooting January or February 2020, get into edit middle of the year, have it out by September, and then opening cinemas on December 8th, 2020. 40 years to the day, and then we can do exactly what we did with the Sgt. Pepper film. We make Lightning Strike twice, right? Big anniversary. It'll be a huge movie. Everyone on the team thought it would be. About late 2019, two things happened. One, we finally found the key investor. And two, I got a call from a friend of mine, and he said, this John Lennon thing you're doing? I said, yeah. He said, you're not still on this angle of what if the killer had been trained by FBI, CIA, or whatever? I said, that might not be the entire focus of the film, but we're still chasing that rabbit, definitely. He said, let it go. I said, why? He said, Apple TV have just commissioned the exact same movie. And they were doing a documentary at that point in time, which I think came out in something like 2021 on Apple TV, which was about that very subject, about whether or not you might have been a patsy or whatever it might be, right? So we thinking, well, we've got a lot of stuff we found out anyway. Regardless of that, we've got other things we found out. So we started moving forward with the plan to shoot in 2020. Started shooting in 2020, no more than maybe 2 weeks. And then this little thing happened that happened to every one of us, where the world closed down. The entire world closed down. And we kind of went, oh, God, we don't even know the end game on this one. All we know is the world's closed down. It's like, it could take a week, could take a month, it could take 8 months. We don't know. I went back to the investors and kind of said, look, obviously this isn't ideal, but we're gathering, the stone is gathering more moss as it rolls. We'd started with 20 interviewees potentially. We now had 40 interviewees potentially at this point, early 2020. One other thing I should add, because it's a big thing, and you know this having seen the movie, is that during the lockdown period, I'd been having a very interesting conversation on private message on Facebook with a guy called Mark Cunningham, who I didn't know from Adam. I just knew him on Facebook, basically.
Okay.
He said to me, oh, you're doing this Lennon film? I said, yeah. He said, so I suppose you'll be talking about the 1981 tour. I said, well, it's an interesting thing, that, Mark. I said, because if you Google the 1981 tour, there's about this much that's written down. Basically, it's like 9 lines or something, right? There's nothing to tell. There's no story there. He said, well, that might not be true. Okay, well, why not? Well, I used to work for a company, Mark this is, called Britannia Row. And my boss at Britannia Row was the guy who went out to Dakota in October of 1980 to meet John and Yoko to start drawing up diagrams for a planned stage set for a whole tour that was going to last all the way through 1981. And I'm at home, he's sat at home, it's the middle of COVID, you can barely cross your doorstep, and I go, when this is all over, would you like a coffee? He goes, sure. And I met up with Mark literally as soon as we could do. The minute they said you can go out, we met. He turned up with a brown envelope that had 3 pencil sketches in, about A4 in size. One was for a potential gig in Liverpool where you'd be projecting images off the Liver building, and one was for an indoor arena show, and one was a kind of another angle of the indoor arena show. What I was most fascinated by, because if you think back to when Paul McCartney did the 89-90 comeback tour, if you like, I did multiple shows on that tour. And you know yourself, there wasn't really much that you'd call technical about it. It just had a backdrop that was hand painted. There was a little movie at the beginning, then there was nothing else much on the screens that wasn't pulled across on curtains. This thing that John's talking about doing a decade earlier has got a stage set that looks like U2 in 2019. It's got cantilever arms, it's got big screens, it's got things moving around at the back of these big screens. And I'm going, that's a bit ambitious, isn't it? He said, yeah. He said, apparently, when John and Yoko were talking to my boss said, what kind of show do you want me to make, John? How do you want me to design this thing? And John said, I don't care what you design, just make sure it gives Mick and Elton fucking ulcers. And so it was going to be this massive big show that I would say, arguably, no one could have competed with in 1981 because no one's thinking that far ahead. And the other thing, the final thing to add is, again, this didn't seem to start happening until about 2010, 2012, another decade, 2-3 decades later. They were going to hit towns and stay there, much like, say, bands like Metallica and U2 do now. So you don't just do a show and leave. You come into a town, stay there for 5 nights, then move on and do another 4 nights somewhere else, right? That was John and Yoko's idea. So this tour was only big, or going to be big. It was absolutely years ahead of its time in planning. To sort of finalize this and get to your next question, within a month of seeing these diagrams, I've got Earl Slick on board. I've got the tour manager on board, Henry the Horse. I've got my old friend Andy Peebles, who obviously had heard things from John about this tour. I've got Mark on camera. I've got the engineer from Double Fantasy, John, who was going to be the front of house sound guy on the tour. And I've also got a couple of journalists. And I'm thinking, wow, we've gone from these 9 lines on a Google search to having the whole story. Passed the diagrams to the animation boys and went, you know, there's that famous Kevin Costner baseball movie where they use the line, if you build it, they will come. I said, build it, because believe me, they're going to come. And we're going to put this story in the movie with the biggest John Lennon story that no one's ever told before, ever in 40 odd years since he died.
And it was really amazing sitting there watching the movie. When you started talking about it, I was sitting there thinking, well, this is kind of interesting. It sounds like a theory of some kind. And then as you kept going and going in the movie, and there was more and more, and with Earl Slick talking and everything, I'm sitting there going, God, what the hell did we miss? And it almost makes you, a viewer, want to start crying because we missed a hell of a freaking show. And that was just astounding to hear all that in the movie. In terms of unauthorized films, as I said in my review, I said most of the time a lot of unauthorized films have the same stuff that everybody else does. But Borrowed Time actually has some freaking news. And that was incredible. And which makes me bring up a question. How did you get around the Lennon estate with this kind of information? Was that a problem?
Yes. I mean, look, when we did the Sgt. Pepper movie, right? I remember the day we started shooting the Sgt. Pepper film, which would be the back end of 2016.
Right.
Someone who knew a legal friend of ours said to me, you do know that when this film gets to edit, and certainly before it gets released, Apple will probably stamp all over you and want to know everything about this film. They want to know when it's coming out, what's going on with it, release-wise, everything, right?
Right.
We were in the studio actually editing the Sgt. Pepper film when it got served by Apple. We got a letter saying, you know, we've never commissioned this movie. We, you know, obviously we've got lots of big plans for the 50th anniversary of Sgt. Pepper. We know you're going to try and come out on the very same day. We would like you to now cease and desist. We put that information in front of a music business lawyer, and the music business lawyer said, well, what is it, this law that they think you've broken, what law would it be? Because you haven't used the Beatles music, you've got your own orchestral score. You've interviewed many people, most of whom worked for them at one time and have all signed off and been paid. And all the footage in the film you've cleared. So can Apple tell me what they want you to cease and desist doing? Well, when I heard that, I thought, I'm not cease and desisting with nothing. So we carried on, put the film out. A lot of people initially thought the film was tied to the whole Sgt. Pepper box set campaign and the Giles Martin remixed album and everything, because we came out on the same day as that. But it wasn't, right? So when we went into doing Lennon, one of the very first questions from the investors or our business manager, anybody, was, what about the Lennon estate? I said, well, what I can tell you is when we did the Beatles movie, they fired a warning shot across the bows, but they didn't take it any further. When we went back and said, this is what we've actually done, and here's a list of the things we haven't done. In other words, we broke no rules. We've been very honest with what we've done. So I think we'll be fine. Fast forward to actually selling the film to distributors to take it to cinema. That was done in the November of 2024. At which point in time, nobody on planet Earth had ever heard anything at all, not a dicky bird, about a film called John Lennon One-on-One. Nothing, not even a one-line press release. We sell it in. The company we sold it to, which is the same distribution company who did the Sgt. Pepper film with us, they then announced in December of 2024 that they were going to release this film in the United Kingdom in first week of May of 2025 this year. About February, the Lennon estate announced this film called One-on-One, which is coming out last week of April 2025, right? It's like 10 days difference in UK release dates. So I'm thinking, it's got to come sometime. And eventually an email arrives from the Lennon estate basically saying that, can you please cease and desist, do not release this film, etc., right? And it's looked at by the distributors, it's looked at by legal. We have a little chat with them. I spoke to a lovely guy in New York, and he basically said, look, is there any John Lennon music in this film? And I said, no, there is no John Lennon music in this film. I said, this film is about the backstory of John Lennon's last decade and slightly beyond. Slightly beyond, what do you mean by that? I said, it doesn't matter because it's all signed off. We've paid for it. It's something we've done, right? And it's nothing for anyone to worry about. If anything, not unlike the Sgt. Pepper film, this movie will probably sell a lot of John Lennon records and a lot of John Lennon albums. And so great. And we presume that would be the same as the Apple thing where they go away. A couple of 3 days later, they're back and it's like, okay, no music in it, but they'd like to view it. So we talked to legal on our side, and legal kind of, well, what do you want to view it for? You've made it, you paid for it. They've had no input in it at all. The diagrams that are in the film, for the 81 World Tour, that became the animation we made into the stages and everything, the guy that designed them was never actually paid for them. He's no longer with us. He passed away, but they now belong to his wife. Copyright, lock, stock, and two smoking barrels, as they say. So again, we weren't really skating on particular thin ice. The only, if there was a downside to all of it, and I say this with all seriousness, we interviewed 62 people in the end, which is a lot of people. And as you, with the exception of a couple of journalists, almost everybody knew John for a minimum of 5 years, is actually in the film, right? Which is not bad for a fellow who only lived to be 40, right? And when we got to edit, there was an awful lot of people who didn't even make it into the cut because there were way better stories, So originally it was cut long form to maybe cut it down into 3 parts and make it into a TV series. Then it was cut short form for chance no one wanted to buy it that way, and we wanted to go straight to cinema. So we had two versions. And the plan was then put to me by management, our management, was why don't we keep both and call one of them the director's cut? Because there's so much good stuff in there, the fans are going to want to see it all. And I think, as you know yourself, yes, the big story is the 1981 comeback tour, but there are also many other little tiny stories that aren't new, but they're maybe giving you more information than you've ever had before,
Mm-hmm.
When I do things like this, the example I always use is the May Pang story, where for 50 odd years we've been being told that Yoko set that affair up. Well, I believe because it's come from such great sources, like very, very well thought of journalists like Ray Conley, I don't think that Yoko set that thing up at all. Now I think that we know historically John was playing around at that point. He'd had a dalliance with some woman in the spare bedroom at Bob Gruen's party.
Right.
Which is well documented. Yoko then went to Chicago to give a women's peace speech, and as soon as her back was turned, John packed 2 suitcases, grabbed the secretary, and went to Los Angeles. That's the story that we've had from about 6 of our interviewees, and I think we use Ray Conley to tell the story in the actual finished production. But so it's not a brand new story, that one, but it's a slight twist on what we think we've heard, and when we counted them up when we did the final cut of the movie, there were 30 of them. There's 30 stories in there where we think we've known the exact truth for say 40, 50 years, and even though we're not reinventing the wheel, there are places in that movie where we are at least putting a new tire on it. Add that to the 81 tour, and I think it makes Borrowed Time incredibly relevant. One of the English reviews for the film said in the review, I've watched every John Lennon documentary ever made, be it official or unofficial. And I can tell you now, the most honest John Lennon film I've ever seen, I just watched. It's called Borrowed Time.
Let me get back to a couple of things that you said. You were talking about May Pang. You did not interview her for the film. I assume that's because of the documentary, The Lost Weekend.
Yeah. I met with May in New York City in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
At that point in time, I had no intention at all of doing a film about John Lennon, but it was in the back of my mind. I knew that one day I'd want to do a film about John Lennon because, there he is, and the man's in my... And I said...
I should tell people that you have him on your arm and on your hand.
Yeah,
because they can't see that. Okay.
When I met May, I said, if we do a film, would you be in it? Because I loved your book. Loving John was the second Beatles book I ever read as a kid. Mm-hmm. And the first one was Shout by Philip Norman. So I went from Shout to Loving John, right? And she said, yes, of course. But bear in mind, to be fair to May, that's the late winter of 2014. We didn't even start talking about a John Lennon film for about 4 more years, right? Mm-hmm. So when we did actually go tour, which I believe was in the latter part of 2019, we didn't even get a response from her. We got an email from the producer of the film she was doing about her own life. And all it said was, May wishes you every success, but she cannot be in this movie for obvious reasons, because they had her under contract, right? And the film, I really enjoyed it. I don't know particularly why she stuck to the Yoko story, because when we had dinner, she'd said that, her and John had left for LA, very much the same way that Ray Conley says in the film, not been necessarily set up first. And the person I really wish I could have interviewed, and I mean this with, but obviously we checked with lawyers and everybody said, you just don't want to go there because you'll be wasting your time when it comes to trying to get it in the finished movie, is I would have liked to have interviewed Fred Seaman. Because I think that there are certain things that happened in the Dakota towards the end of John's life that none of us know anything about yet. I believe one of those things in my heart, this has always been something I've felt for years and years and years, is despite the world tour of 81 that was planned, And despite the fact, that, as Earl Slick says, that they'd already demoed this second album they were going to do in '82 and then go out on the road again, which of course became Milk and Honey posthumously. But I personally don't think John and Yoko's marriage would have lasted another 2 years. I think they'd have been divorced. That's just me.
Okay. Why has it taken so long for the movie to get to America? Because you premiered it over there in England in May, and now it's finally getting here on, of all days, December 8th, which, since you had originally gone with December 8th for the anniversary, I now kind of understand why you are doing December 8th now, but it's still kind of weird to have it on that day.
The plan had always been to release it piecemeal, like we did with the Pepper movie, right? Mm-hmm. So for the Monty Python film, it came out in September 2009, all the way around the world in one day. We'd found with the Sgt. Pepper movie that we got more press in different countries if we'd staggered the release. So that rather than coming out all in one day, you can get, say, front pages of Australian rock and roll magazines if you come out separately in Australia or wherever else. There was never a plan to do Borrowed Time on December 8th. What happened was the film was put out for tenure by Kaleidoscope in the United Kingdom. They were also releasing it in the UK and in Europe. They sold it to a company in Japan, which was just released about a month ago. They got involved with my business manager to do a deal for India, which is going to be done, I believe, in January or February. It's going to be the first Beatles film to be in cinemas in India, which is fast. I mean, the Beatles are huge in India right now. I know that because I've got friends out there. And then along came this company who you may be familiar with because they've done quite a number of unofficial Beatles films in America. Liverpool Productions, who did, I believe, the Fan film. They did May Pang's film. They did our Sgt. Pepper film. And they bought the US Canadian rights to Borrowed Time.
I think the name is Liverpool West.
There you go. Liverpool West Productions, right? And
yeah, they just released a new film called Love to the Beatles. They did the Chris O'Dell film.
Yeah. They did May Pang's film for US. Yeah.
Oh, did they? See, okay.
As far as I'm aware, they did, yeah. But they bought it. They bought it a while ago. They bought it in, I think, June or July. I met with them in their hotel in London in July. They seemed like great people. And they said to me, what was the plan originally? Because we know this film was supposed to come out on the 40th anniversary of John's death. And I said, we wanted initially to open on the 40th because we'd done this 50th thing with Sgt. Pepper, and we thought it would have a lineage, So I could see Doug mulling this over. I thought, I can see this has started the clockwork going up here on him, And he came back a few weeks later by email and he said, look, we've just been talking to one of the cinemas in New York City. Now, I've been in New York on December 8th about 7 or 8 times over the years. Mm-hmm. Yourself, Strawberry Fields is mobbed. There's people outside Dakota with candles. One year it was snowing. There was still a massive crowd up there at that corner near Dakota and Strawberry Fields. There was people. Mm-hmm. So I can see the logic of going with it because there's a lot of fans out that day anyway. They probably want somewhere to go in the evening because it's normally very cold in New York in December. And they came back, as I say, about 2-3 weeks later and said, would you mind awfully if we did the US premiere on December the 8th? And I said, well, it would be Churchillish of me to say yes if I said I did mind, because we spent a year and a half planning to go out on December 8th, 2020, and then couldn't do because of COVID. So in many ways, I suppose we did get our anniversary, but this time we got the 45th anniversary, not the 40th one. Mm-hmm. The tickets, as you're probably aware, went on sale, I think, last Tuesday. I'm doing a Q&A at that screening.
Yes, I know. You are. I know that you are doing it.
All the available tickets went in 7 minutes.
Are they going to do is there going to be a second screening? Do you know?
Later that week, it's going to the Fort Lauderdale Film Festival.
Ah, okay.
Lauderdale Film Festival on the 10th, 11th, and I believe maybe even the 12th, because again, they're selling tickets like it's the best thing that happened since bread came sliced. They can't stop selling tickets at Fort Lauderdale. I believe it's also opening in Chicago. There's a couple of three. It'll all be on Liverpool West's website, but there is a few screenings happening around that time. And I also believe the plan is to be on DVD and Blu-ray in the American version pre-Christmas Eve, so sometime after the premieres and before Christmas Eve.
American DVD and Blu-ray going to be any different than the British?
No, not at all.
No.
The standard version on the DVD, because both versions don't fit onto a DVD.
Right.
And there's two versions, long and short version on the Blu-ray. If we use my brother as a barometer, and there are worse people, believe me, you could use as a barometer. Most people, and he's a huge Lennon fan like me, Beatles fan. Most people watch the short version and then get curious and watch the long version and go, wow. Because, as you know, having seen them both, it's not just the fact that there's 98 minutes more information in the long version. The long version's got a different earlier intro that we made months earlier and then rejected. The long version's got some different music in it. The long version has a song in it that we commissioned and liked, and then suddenly people decided they didn't like, so there's a bit of a shift on that one. The long version is in a different order. In the long version, you have to wait till the very end to find out about the 1981 tour.
And I was going to ask you about that because when I watched the short version, the flow was great. And then when I started watching the director's cut, I'm going, where are they going with this? And obviously where you went is you put basically everything in chronological order.
Yeah.
And I have to be honest, I thought it flowed better in the short version than in the long version.
Oh, it does. Yeah, I direct.
And I said, I don't know why they just didn't expand what they had already started on. And
no. Let me tell you how that came about.
Mm-hmm.
The long version was at best a working, what we call in the trade, a working rough cut, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sent out for tenure with the sales guys,
mm-hmm.
with the intention, because although you can't see them, in my head I had, well, we could cut it there and we'd have 3 episodes, right? So we'd said to the channels, this is a 3-episode TV series about the last decade of John Lennon's life.
Mm-hmm.
Hence the chronological order. We sent it out for tenure. It was out about 3 months. The sales guys came back and they said, listen, we're getting a lot of feedback from distributors who are saying Alan is best known for cinematic movies. Alan is best known for about 2 hours or just over. And Alan is best known for things that seem to contain a lot of new information. This long one is cool, but it doesn't tick all those boxes. And this is such a bizarre story, but perfectly true. My dear friend Tony Bramwell came to the studio in December as he died in February.
Mm-hmm.
And he sat down with me. I've known Tony since I met him at a Liverpool Beatles convention when I was 18, so 40 odd years, right? And he sat down with me and we watched the long form version, the whole thing, 3.5 hours. And at the end of it, he looked at me and he said, oh, I thought you were making a film about my mate. And I thought, oh my God, he doesn't like it. This is terrible, because I really wanted him to like it. And he stood up and I stood up and he walked forward. He gave me a big hug and he went, Alan, you didn't make a film about my mate. You made the film about my mate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny you should say that, because this version you've just seen is about to get press the button, completely deleted tomorrow to start a new cut for cinema. And he looked at me and he went, you can't delete this. That's got to go out. The fans will love that. There's all kinds of things in there that, don't get discussed normally, unless it's over a glass of wine in the bar at the Adelphi late night after the convention.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, okay. So I went back to my business managers and kind of said, by the way, Tony Bramwell thinks we should keep the long version. And that's where the idea came, call it a director's cut. Now, when we went back in to recut it, bear in mind by that point, I, the director of the film and the writer of the film, have been living with this movie now for about 10 months. I couldn't tell you how many times I'd seen it at 3.5 hours, probably about 30 or 40 times easily. And I'd made a lot of notes. And I thought, you know what? The biggest story we've got is the 1981 tour, without doubt. Wouldn't it be interesting just to see, for an experiment, because they usually use test audiences before you get released, wouldn't it be interesting to see how people react if the opening credits end, you hit them straight away, bang, have that. Then you've got them, as the old saying goes, by the cojones, and you can drag them where you want for 2 hours. So we put it together and we made it in that form. We changed a few stories around, dropped a few stories, shortened some stuff, lengthened other stuff, and we put it together in a linear order, but starting with the biggie, with the 1981 tour. It then got screened for 2 test audiences. Grown men and women were crying before it was 10 minutes old, literally sobbing like babies in 60-seater viewing cinemas, crying. And I'd walk in and go, they Beatles fan? Well, there was a lady in, we did a director's Q&A in New Brighton, a few around the country. And a lady came up to me afterwards and she said to me, Alan, can I give you a hug? I said, if you want to. Why? She said, I've been a John Lennon fan since I was 10 years old. I was 60 last week. That's 50 years. I thought I knew about John Lennon. She said, I feel like I've just spent 2 hours and 14 minutes in John Lennon University. And I said, thank you. And she started crying. And I went, my old lip went like that. My mate was stood behind me, had been driving me, and I just gave her a hug and I said, listen, thank you. And I look up and there's about a line of 30 people waiting just to shake my hand. And they're all saying the same thing. They're saying, we've never seen a more emotional film about John. And we've never learned more in 2 hours. I was talking to people who, like me, you can see behind me here, have read every book, have listened to every bootleg, have got shelf upon shelf of outtakes, have got knows how many bootleg DVDs and Blu-rays of footage that maybe nobody else owns. They come to see Borrowed Time and they tell me that they feel like they've been at Lennon University. And I'm bowled over by that, genuinely. And I think that's why, because we spent a little more time on the cinema cut, and because we really put our heads together in the studio and kind of went, you know what, this has got to work. This has got to work on a big level. I'm proud as hell of it, I've got to be honest. I'm really, really proud of it.
The 3-hour version is the one you're going to show in New York? Is that
right? The 2-hour version we're showing in New York.
You're going to show the short version in New York. Okay.
We normally put the 2-hour version in cinema. Occasionally, you will find the 3-hour version on various pay-per-view channels around the world. It's on the Blu-ray. To me, really, now, it's a kind of a, and again, this is having lived with it for a number of years, believe me, by now. It's like a template for John Lennon Borrowed Time. But normally, most directors take their templates and put them in the bin before we ever show them to an audience. Largely because what my old friend Tony Bramwell said to me, and largely because of a few other things, I'm quite happy for people to see my template.
Are you going to is it going to travel to more cities than just the 2 that you mentioned?
At this minute, I don't know. I know it's being released very widely in right across America and Canada, literally within about 36 hours of the New York screening.
Okay.
We wanted.
So it is.
I've got to tell you this, Dave, because this has made my day this last few weeks. We knew we couldn't interview Fred Seaman because of Yoko's gagging order, right? 17 years I worked for EMI Records, and I met pretty much everybody that was ever involved in the Beatles, you know, wives, ex-girlfriends, Mr. George Martin, Paul McCartney, Ringo, blah, 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 blah. The list goes on. Yoko twice, years and years ago, on we go, right? The one person from John's universe that I've never met in my life is Fred Seaman, because the opportunity to meet Fred Seaman would only have arrived on borrowed time. And I didn't get that opportunity because we knew, having spoken to our lawyers, that if we interviewed him, we couldn't use it anyway because she's got this gagging order on him, right? But I really, really wanted to meet Fred Seaman. And Doug Swab, who is Mr. Liverpool West Productions, basically, rang me about a week ago and he said, I've got two lots of good news for you. I said, really? Yeah. Number one, the New York screening has just sold out in about 7 or 8 minutes. Wow, that's great. That's good news. Number two, Fred Seaman's coming. And I'm bold because we took the title from Fred's book, Borrowed Time. It's not from the John Lennon single because we knew we wouldn't have access to it. But I thought that when I read Fred's book, I thought, if you're going to talk about the last decade of John's life, you've got to call it Borrowed Time. There's no other title. What was funny about it is for 3 years of shooting and production, it was borrowed time, borrowed time, borrowed time, borrowed time. And then we go to list it on IMDb, Internet Movie Database. And my line producer rings me and she says, we got a problem. I said, why? She said, there's over 200 films called Borrowed Time. And most of them are dramas. So that's where comes the subtitle, Lennon's Last Decade.
Okay. I want to ask about certain people in the film, some of the stories. One story that really intrigued me was the Alan Weiss story.
Yes.
I'd heard part of it. I remember hearing it in another documentary, but he goes into it a lot more in your film because from a journalistic point of view, his story is just amazing that he managed to do. His
story is the best. He came to us fairly easy enough. We got a contact for him. We rang. He said yes. We went to his place just outside New York City and we sat down with him. And basically, I've had lots of hats in my career. I worked as a press officer, then I worked for EMI for many years. While I was at EMI, I wrote a number of books. I also wrote for the rock press. So I thought, hang on a minute. I've been a journalist. He is a journalist. So while they were setting the cameras up, I said, Alan, I'm sure you're probably sick to death of telling this story because you've probably been asked about it, every anniversary of every year for 40 years. However, maybe there's some detail you've never gone into. What we're trying to do is a real, almost forensic style deep dive on John Lennon. So if you believe anything you never said before, throw it in, because I may use it. It might have a reference. And what was great about him is because he used to be a presenter, when he was on camera, you've never seen anybody more professional in your life. He was absolutely red hot. And occasionally we were sat across from each other with my DOP stood behind with the camera, and he'd go, hang on, Alan, I can do that better. Let's go again on that next answer. And I go, honestly, I could listen to this guy all day. And occasionally you got that, people like, say, Tariq Ali, who again was part of the English peace movement and knew John and Yoko very well back in the late 60s. Occasionally Tariq would, because again, he's talked about John Lennon till the cows come over the hill. So occasionally he'd give you an answer and then he'd go, whoa, hang on, Alan, I've got a better answer than that. I can do it. So what I'd said to a few of the people that we were talking about December 8th on was, look, this film is roughly, and it is a very rough diagram, as you know, having seen both versions. The rough diagram is the 3 stages of John's life. Stage 1 is childhood, the fact that he hadn't got a great relationship with his mother and father, the fact he was bounced from pillar to post and then anti-memes, blah, blah, blah. Was he the most stable Beatle? Not by a long chalk. He had a terrible background in that respect. Paul's much more, polite family, then into the Beatles, then get the Beatles over and done with quickly, because the only real relevant point for our film is that he meets Yoko Ono during that last part. And then stage 2 starts when they go to America. Stage 2 in my head kind of goes up to and including John getting his green card, which then ends after that. And then we go into the final part, which is what was he doing while he was not active in the public eye, Double Fantasy, and December 8th. So I want December 8th to have, even though there's been documentaries, you know yourself, that are about nothing apart from December 8th. I wanted December 8th to have a brand new relevance, because I thought if we haven't got a brand new relevance, there's no point including it. We may as well do one of those things that movies do, where you put a black screen up and in white letters it says John Lennon was assassinated on December 8th, 1980, right? If there's nothing new to bring to the party. But Alan Weiss was amazing. When we interviewed Dave Scholin, Jerry Cagle, and Laurie, who all were connected because they were all part of that last American interview, and Dave Scholin, God as Jerry Cagle, God bless him, Jerry Cagle has never been interviewed about John Lennon before. Can you imagine 40 odd years of a man who knew John from the Lost Weekend through to his last ever interview, so over 7 years, right? And had to pay for the goddamn interview himself, because when the radio station was offered the interview, they said, "Oh, John Lennon's no longer relevant." They didn't handoffs like the BBC and Andy Peebles. They said, "Oh, Lennon's no longer relevant." So Jerry Cagle, who knew he was still relevant, paid for Dave and Laurie to fly to New York himself to do the interview. Right? As he said jokingly later, within 24 hours, it's the best money you've ever spent, right? Because suddenly it's a different ball game. You have the last testament of this huge rock star. However, when we got to interviewing those guys, then you get the story from Laurie and then the story from Andy Peebles about both of them encountered the killer. So when we got to, say, the December 8th section of the film, we've got John, who was the engineer on the album. We've got Andy Peebles. We've got Dave Scholin. We got Laurie. We got Jerry Cagle. We've got one or two journalists. We've got Ray Conley, who, of course, was supposed to fly out from England on the night of the 8th of December, get to America and do a big interview for the Evening Standard with John. He'd never told that story is in his John Lennon book, but he'd never told that story ever on camera. Imagine being led in bed, knowing that the next phone call you're going to get is the taxi outside to take you to Heathrow Airport. And then what actually happens is that the phone rings about 2 hours earlier than that, and it's your editor. "Hi, Ray. Part 1, you're not going to New York. Part 2, I've got some terrible news. Your friend got shot last night. I need an obituary on my desk by dinner time." That's a lot in one phone call.
Yeah, that was a pretty amazing story. Let me get back to Alan Weiss for a minute.
He comes into the hospital literally 2 minutes in front of John Lennon. Now all he's done is possibly broke his leg, maybe damaged his arm, and he's on a gurney. Before he's been wheeled into a corridor, so they hear the doors behind them smash open and someone screams out, "Gunshot to the chest." So you're no longer priority by any stretch of the imagination, you know? Right. Somebody coming in who's a bigger deal. Never mind that he's a rock star. If it had been, you know, the next guy you or I see at the bus stop, it would still have been a bigger deal. Came in and he's right outside the emergency room. And then, of course, the two cops come out. Can you believe it? They just shot John Lennon.
Right.
What did you say off? Oh, you know, you go, God, you imagine you're a young news guy. Someone just unwittingly, because obviously the cop can't know he's a young news guy. He's dressed all in black and he's covered in dirt and leaves. He could be a victim, right? Unwittingly, that cop has just given him the scoop of his life.
Exactly. Oh yeah, that's what's really intriguing about that story. And here he is, you know, he's there, a freak happening, and he hears the story, and you know, you don't know in what shape he's in, but he's heard this cop say that, and it's like, what? And yeah, that's what's really interesting.
What's interesting is this: because there's a section of Alan's interview that I'd never heard him talk about before anywhere. And that's the one where the doctor comes in who can now finally see Alan, because it's very obvious in Alan's head that whoever was in that other room, Mr. John Lennon, is now Mr. John Lennon deceased, right? And Alan's led there, and they say, oh, we're going to treat you, but she needs to go and get some paperwork. And he says, can I use that phone over there?
Right.
And she says, well, no, you can. And then he gives her that lovely description about, did you want to be the best doctor you could be? I want to be the best. Brilliant story, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting about it is when he rings the TV station and he finally gets through, he gets the code number, lest we forget what's on. And it's Monday night in New York City, so it's Monday Night Football.
Right.
Now, according to a couple of journalist friends of mine who have worked and lived in New York for many years, stopping Monday Night Football in New York is a bit like stopping a coronation in the UK, basically.
You're absolutely right about that, especially with Howard Cosell leading the commentators. He was a big deal at that point. And
if you're a big sports journalist, right, and you've got a big game on that night, I don't think it would matter if they just told you that Julius Caesar had been stabbed to death. You want to get to at least half time before you make any rash decisions, don't you? Basically, I think that could be the case.
Right. Yeah, they needed to do some major decisions. I mean, that was a big deal. The other story that caught my attention was Robert Morgan's story about looking down on the shooting scene. The only part of that is from him is the drawing, correct? You have a little live segment. Where did that come from?
Where we were very lucky with Robert Morgan. He now lives in Venice, and we got him that came via a friend of a friend. We've been trying to track him down for months on end. I've got a very funny story, which is perfectly true. I'm getting to the point where I know I've got to find Robert Morgan, but I'm banging my head against a stone wall, because every road we travel, we don't get nowhere. I go for lunch in a hotel I use very regular in the centre of London, and I'm sat with a couple of friends and a legal friend of ours. And I say out of nowhere, God, they go, are you all right, Alan? I said, well, I'm okay. I said, but, we're trying to find this guy, and normally when we want somebody, we can normally find them by asking a couple of people or getting an email address and asking somebody else. They're always within arm's reach, shall we say, right, these people. This guy is proving utterly elusive. And the legal guy says, what's his name? I said, Robert Morgan. And he looks up and he goes, oh, Bob Morgan and his dog, Scruffy. I go, what? Bob Morgan and his dog, Scruffy, the artist guy, yeah? I go, yeah. He said, yeah, he lives near a friend of mine in Venice on one of the canals. I said, what? He said, yeah, lives near a friend of mine. So, lo and behold, within about an hour, this email address appears. I send it over to my line producer and she makes contact. He's really happy to hear from us. Yeah, fine. He said, have you been to New York yet? She said, not yet, no. He said, well, I've got some good news for you. Good news? We'll do like a bit of good news. What's the good news you've got, Bob? You know the flat where I used to live, where I witnessed everything happening from? Yeah. I sold it to my best mate. Yeah, but that's like 42 years ago, Bob. Yeah, he still lives there with his wife. He does? Wow. I'll ring him. So he rings him. He said, listen, this film crew's coming over and they'd like to film my eye view. So we go in the flat one morning, this 12th floor flat, that not only perfectly has got Bob's eye view, where he sat in the window area and looked down and watched all this unfold in front of him, but if you look directly across into the Dakota building, you can see their lounge and the white piano. That's John and Yoko's apartment, right? The lads are busy doing the downward shot. That I'm telling them, I said, shoot everything, shoot the side of the building, shoot the lot, right? He's at work, the wife's around. Suddenly, the wife comes in the lounge and she says, Alan, have you got a minute? Okay, so I follow her and she takes me into the master bedroom. And she says, look, and I look out right across Central Park. Now, every book I'd ever read about John Lennon, especially say, oh God, he's in the movie and I've forgotten his name for a moment, but he wrote that incredible book, John Lennon 1980, the American guy. He's in the film, and I can't remember. His name's just slipped out of my mind.
Okay.
But you read all these books, and all these books basically say that for the last few years of John's life, he'd get up, he'd go to the kitchen, he'd make a cappuccino, he'd have a croissant, and he'd sit in the window looking right out over Central Park.
Mm-hmm.
And I look over there out the other bedroom window, right into John's flat again, and I go, good God, we haven't just got Robert Morgan's eye view on the night of December 8th, we've got John Lennon's eye view for the last 5 years of his life. So I go, guys, when you finish in there, come in here and get this as well. So all that stuff you see in the opening credits, and then later on in the story, although because obviously when we shot the view down, it was 11 a.m. on a very bright summer's morning. What I do is then take that footage, give it to the animation guys, and they make it 11 o'clock at night with 1980s police cars and cops hanging around and everything, right?
Okay.
But everything we did in that flat, we did from Bob Morgan's angle. So yes, the painting is the only thing that was done on the night, but everything else was offered to us because Bob Morgan happened to sell that flat to his mate, and 40 odd years later, his mate never moved an inch.
Okay. Okay.
God bless his mate.
Yeah, I wondered about that as I was sitting there watching that, where, I actually was thinking it might be AI, and I was hoping it wasn't.
No,
So,
it's for
okay.
real. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned Tony Bramwell. Who else close to John Lennon has praised you for the movie?
Who saw the film that knew John good? Andy saw it. Andy Peebles came down and saw it again not long before he passed. He really enjoyed it. He thought the film was really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think who else that I know that has actually seen it that's in the film. I know Ray's seen it. Ray Conley enjoyed it. I
Mm-hmm.
this directly, but I'm told Philip Norman enjoyed it. I got told that by a friend of mine. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've had, say,
Has Bob Harris or Earl Slick seen it?
I don't know if Phil's seen it, but Bob apparently, according to Bob's producer at BBC Radio, Bob really enjoyed it.
Okay.
Bob said to me, this is I was so flattered by this, I can't tell you. We did Bob's interview
Mm-hmm.
for ages because both of us can talk. And at the end of it, he stood up and he said, that's got to be the best interview I've ever done in my life. He said, where do you get all your information from? I said, well, it's about 40 odd years of studying and then being very excited about meeting you last night and writing even more notes.
Mm-hmm.
From. So, no, Bob was fantastic. Tariq Ali was absolutely brilliant. And again, an absolute honor to meet that guy. It really was. There's a lot of people who were in that film who, to get their perspective by sitting them down, for example, Ray Conley over the years has kind of said or alluded to, there's quite a few things about the last 10 years of John's life that I don't agree with. They're going back to Yoko, fine, but then they start almost having a revisionist period upon their previous history, So it's almost like, oh, we did this, didn't we, John? Did we? Oh, yes, sorry, love, yes, we did. There is a bit of that went on at the end, and I don't think that sat very well with Ray at all. He kind of didn't like that at all,
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's quite a few of the sort of older guys that were in the film that were sort of saying it did seem to be very out of character for John to suddenly start towing the party line, even so far down the line, But again, there's some very good stories in there, that do, I suppose, arguably slightly contradict what we've been told for 40 odd years.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I would never put anything on screen that wasn't checked, and double checked,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I must say, having seen both versions of the movie, it's well worth seeing for anybody listening. The stories in there are, some of them are absolutely amazing. The tour story is a mind blower. And as I was saying earlier, it's enough to make you cry that we could have what we were going to have.
I've been around this country doing Q&As on this movie, right? Manchester, Birmingham, London multiple times. And sometimes, not every time, because obviously I've seen the film now to the point of knowing it backwards in French, and I don't know any French. But I've sat occasionally at the back of the cinema, whether it's for the first half hour, the last half hour, or the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I have seen grown men and women in tears by the time we get to John in black and white talking about the Jesus Christ apology. And that's only 8 minutes into the film. Because I don't think they can take in the fact that had it not been for that horrendous man and what he did, we as fans of this man, John Lennon, would have all been treated to one of the most far ahead of its time concert tours that ever hit this planet in the history of this planet and or the music business. And we were robbed of that by 5 bullets. And right. There's nothing that you can say that can make up for that.
No, there really, really isn't. Just for the sake of rounding everything up, the U.S. premiere is in New York on December 8th.
About 2 blocks down from Dakota. It's completely sold out now.
But it will travel around.
As far as I'm aware, there will be other screenings around different parts of the States and Canada. And there is a plan, I know, to definitely 100% nail it to the wall. DVD and Blu-ray US format will be this side of Christmas, yeah.
Okay. So if you don't get to see it in the theater, you will get to see it because it'll hit home video.
Yeah.
So all I can say is thank you for taking the time. Alan, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
I wish you all the luck with this, all the best of luck with this film.
Yeah.
And what else can I say? Thank you again. I'm gonna hit the stop button here.
And here's some Beatle news briefs. The Beatles Anthology Collection, including the new Anthology 4, was released worldwide on Friday, November 21st. Social media had lots of comment, of course. We'll say more in the next portion of the show following the news. The Folio Society has recently published a new hardcore slipcase edition of the book Philip Norman's Shout. The book is now housed in a slipcase and has photos from noted Beatles photographer Terry O'Neill. Norman also has a new book coming in June titled Mr. Moonlight, Brian Epstein and the Making of the Beatles. According to the advanced description, it draws on new interviews, quote, to tell the story of this hugely complex, self-contradictory, and ultimately tragic character. As he often does when he performs in Canada and in England, Paul McCartney performed Mull of Kintyre in the encore of his November 21st concert at the TD Coliseum in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Come on, Paul, do it in the U.S. Here's some Beatle chart news. On the UK charts dated November 20th to 26th, Beatles 67 to 70 is number 66. And a Beatles date in Beatle history, Rubber Soul began an 8-week run at number 1 on the UK charts beginning on Christmas Day in 1965. For daily updates of Beatle news and information, be sure to visit our Beatles News and Information page on Facebook. Here's some thoughts on the new Beatles Anthology Collection. The wealth of new Beatle outtakes on Anthology 4 make it a necessity. Some of the outtakes are revelations, starting with the first track, Take 2 of I Saw Her Standing There, which surfaced on bootlegs years ago and shows the guys at their live list. It was a joy then, and it's a joy now. Matchbox Take 1 is a vocal exercise for Ringo, who 2 days later would enter the hospital for a tonsillectomy, though he hardly sounds strained here. In My Life Take 1 is just beautiful as the song begins to gel but has a wonderful harmony moment at the beginning that didn't make it to the final master take. Nowhere Man Take 1 exhibits sounds of the McGuinn and Company Birds. The funniest track, though, is Baby You're a Rich Man, with Paul's joke about marijuana likely done for the ears of Mick Jagger, who was reportedly in the studio. There are so many wonderful things here. Anthology 4 also has the new mixes of Free as a Bird, Real Love, and Now and Then. Real Love has gotten the most comments. You can't help but notice that in the new version, John does not rhyme the lyrics as it appeared to be that he was doing on the old one, because his voice was mixed much lower. The new 4-disc Beatles Anthology Collection is a nice present, although it would have been nicer if some of the discs had been cleaned up, removing the speeches on Volume 1, and on Volume 2 the poor edit on Yes It Is, and 2 of McCartney and Lennon's worst songs, If You've Got Troubles, and That Means a Lot. But they were all left alone. Anyway, Anthology 4 is definitely the way to go if money won't allow you to get the box set. One very late breaking piece of news. We're recording this on the morning of Wednesday the 26th, and Disney Plus began dropping the episodes of the anthology last night. They dropped the first 3 at 12:01 a.m. PST, and that's the time the other 6 will drop over the next 2 nights at 12:01 a.m. PST. We've seen some minor changes, nothing really extravagant yet. One thing we noticed, or thought we noticed, was that My Girl Is Red Hot in the very first chapter sounded really, really good, and gives us cause to hope that at some point they'll remix the whole thing and reissue it, because I think it really deserves it, because the Beatles playing on that is just so good. But there you go. For those of you who, again, like to get up early, be up at 12:01 a.m. PST the next 2 nights to catch Beatles Anthology. And happy Thanksgiving. One other late-breaking piece of news we wanted to add. Alan G. Parker mentioned there would be other screenings of Borrowed Time after the premiere in New York on December 8th. We found 2 on the Liverpool West Productions website. One is at 6:30 p.m. December 10th at the Loft Cinema 3233 Speedway Boulevard in Tucson, Arizona. And the other, there's 2 actually, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, December 10th and 11th at 7 p.m. at the Savor Cinema, SAVOR, 503 Southeast 6th Street in Fort Lauderdale. There will be others, he said in the interview, but for now, those are the 2 that I see on the Liverpool West website, and that's where you should check for information for other screenings in other cities.
Thanks very much for listening to our podcast today. If you enjoyed our program, we'd really appreciate a positive review at the place where you get your podcasts. Apple and Google love positive reviews, and it really helps us. If you don't already, please subscribe to our show so you'll get our newest shows right away. We have some great shows coming up. We would love to hear your suggestions for the show, so please write to us at BeatlesNewsBriefs@gmail.com or catch us online on Facebook in our Beatles News and Information group. If you've missed any of our past shows, you can hear them at marinucci.podbean.com, and please tell your friends about us. We appreciate you all for listening. Now here again is Steve Marinucci.
Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed our interview with writer-director Alan G. Parker. We'll have more on Borrowed Time in the next show, which will be coming soon, so watch for it. Until then, this is your host, Steve Marinucci, saying,
Be seeing you.
What a show! Oh, wonderful.